London in the year 1760 was a metropolis choked by heavy fog and coal smoke, as well as being a colossal labyrinth. While this city experienced the glory of the Age of Enlightenment to its extreme, it also contained a chaotic despair within itself. The sun's rays struggled to reach the city's narrow and crooked streets, and the constant, loud noise never ceased. It was considered the capital of new trade routes and global discoveries. However, public order and judicial laws were lost, not in the sparkling salons of the West End, but in the back alleys of the city, steeped in poverty. When night fell, the faint yellow light of the street lamps could only illuminate a few steps. Every dark corner left behind gave rise not to justice, but to fear. This situation was a perfect ground not only for the commission of a criminal act, but also for the easy disappearance of the traces of the crime. Now, let us examine how the shadow of a series of dark cases abandoned to unsolvability in police records stretched across this chaotic and unsafe terrain. This chain of unsolvability we are examining represented a period when London feared not only loss of life, but also the vanishing of truth itself. The discovery of the events summarized the despair of the period. A lifeless body found by chance by a tired watchman returning from his night shift with the first light of dawn. This was just a tragedy, but the details were so disturbing that the situation quickly drew the attention of local authorities. But the problem was this. In those days, the absence of an official security organization that couldn't keep pace with the new industrial revolution meant that even the first detective initiatives like the Bow Street Runners were only effective in a small area. Security for a whole city was generally attempted by sleepy and untrained neighborhood watchmen. This situation often led to investigations being stifled by jurisdictional confusion. These unsolved cases were therefore easily forgotten, and perpetrators easily disappeared. However, this time the situation was different. A single omission noted by an experienced watchman examining the scene while preparing a list of items taken from the victim pointed to a detail that was overlooked at the time, but would later become the focus of the entire investigation. Scrupulously examining the scattered and fragmented police notes of the period, we see that a series of unsolved cases committed throughout the 1760s, whose direct connection couldn't be proven, but whose methods were similar, were labeled as closed. And these records formed a pattern every time. The complete list of personal items taken from the victim was missing after every attack. A small leather-bound notebook, assumed to have recorded the victim's secrets, perhaps their last conversations, and most importantly, the identity of the perpetrator, that is, the lost journal, vanished from every crime scene.
This situation entirely changed the nature of the unsolved criminal act. It meant that the perpetrator not only took a life, but also stole a secret or a memory. This dark process was no longer just a physical assault, but also a psychological and intellectual challenge. The greatest fear for the people of London was the inoperability of the justice mechanism. Society knew that the lost journal would expose not only the secret of these cases, but also the corrupted soul of the city, perhaps even the city's secret rulers. In an era when the laws you trusted could not protect you, having your only hope rest on the revelation of an unknown person's journal is immense despair. The cry of those who first reported the incident was the voice not just of a tragedy, but of the endless fear created by the absence of justice. As we learn about the lost journal claims now, we will actually be talking about the spiritual and legal impact of these unsolved cases on London. At this point, where the investigation records ended, the whispers of the public and social hysteria began. So, what did the judicial system of that period do in the face of this unsolvability? The answer to this question unfortunately presents us with a scattered tableau of panic rather than an organized effort. The absence of an official police force in London in the early 1760s was the first and biggest reason why a solution became impossible. Unlike today's organized units, investigations were completely devoid of scientific analysis. Even the first detective attempts, like the Bow Street Runners, lacked sufficient authority and resources. Investigations were usually based on tips, rumors, and eyewitness statements. The resolution of these criminal acts mostly depended on the intuition of the detectives and the conscience of the local populace. But in an environment of widespread poverty and despair, even eyewitness testimony had become a commodity that could be easily bought or distorted. The constant contradiction among sworn witnesses in courtrooms showed how fragile the investigators' most fundamental support was. In other words, when a detective wanted to follow a lead, they faced a wall woven from lies, bribes, and conflicting claims. Even before the investigation began, the evidence was lost in the waters of this chaos.
When we examined these unsolved cases, the chaotic nature of the investigation was revealed in all its nakedness. The cases were not found in a single organized file, but in the local watchman's makeshift notes and personal handwritten records. There was no standard format, common chain of evidence, or systematic method among these records. The watchmen of each district kept their own ledger, and when a watchman left office or died, all the knowledge accumulated in that ledger disappeared with them. This administrative fragmentation of London provided the perpetrator with an incredible scope for action. Moving just a few streets away after committing an attack meant entering another legal jurisdiction. This completely severed communication among investigators. Furthermore, the forensic knowledge of that period was next to nothing. Since concepts like preserving the crime scene or collecting biological evidence were unknown, the scenes quickly became contaminated, leaving behind only the cold and inadequate lines of legal reports. It was this structural inadequacy that explained why the lost journal claim spread so quickly. Since the police could not find concrete evidence, the public was forced to believe that the truth must be hidden within a lost secret. This situation doubled the despair of the detectives. On one hand, they were trying to find the perpetrator, and on the other, they were searching for a mystery whose existence they were not sure of. The fragmentation of this investigation mechanism made it impossible to definitively determine if the lost journal was even truly missing. In that period, the reward system was used to catch criminals. In other words, a reward was promised for every criminal caught. This system further crippled the judicial process by encouraging bribery and false testimony. It was more appealing for a detective to quickly solve a minor crime and claim the reward rather than conducting a difficult and lengthy investigation. Therefore, the unsolvability of these cases stemmed not merely from incompetence, but directly from the economic structure of the system. Additionally, the system of justice of the peace of the time added a final layer to the investigation chaos. These judges were not typically trained legal professionals, but local figures with influence. Although they were responsible for keeping crime reports and issuing investigation orders, they tended to quickly label cases that did not suit their interests or were difficult to solve as closed. This was the final straw that guaranteed the lost journal claims would never be subject to a systematic investigation. The negligence of these judges embodied the absence of justice in the eyes of the public. Furthermore, most of the victims came from the most disadvantaged and marginalized segments of London. This led the police establishment to regard these cases as low priority.
As if the limitations of investigation tools were not enough, the indifference shown towards these tragedies originating from the lower strata of society further amplified the gaps in the legal records. In other words, the lost journal became a concrete symbol of the stolen memories of individuals the judicial system did not care about. This gave rise to the feeling that the lost journal was not just a ledger, but the only evidence that could not be bought. According to the available data, when constructing the chronology, we see that these unsolved cases followed one another rapidly. The first unsolved case was the single, shocking event where the lost journal disappeared. However, the fact that the subsequent second and third tragedies were committed using a similar method to the first, and that a record document disappeared each time again, triggered the feeling that there was a pattern in society. The increasing frequency of these cases showed the perpetrators' control over London, not the police's. Every new unsolved case killed not only a life, but also the trust in the legal system. All these events revealed that the investigation was not a detective adventure, but a story of institutional despair. Because the evidence we have proves more than the existence of the lost journal, that the judicial system of that period was too weak to even keep its own records. At this point, where the investigation records ended, the whispers of the public and social hysteria began. The institutional impasse of the investigation, that is, the inability of the judicial system either to find the lost journal or to definitively deny the existence of the vanished notebooks, triggered a profound psychological crisis in London. Firstly, the public began to fear not just a perpetrator, but a supernatural power that saw everything but was never caught. This was not a simple fear of crime. This was an existential fear fueled by the belief that memory could be stolen and that even the most personal secrets could be used as a weapon. Despite there being no curfew at night, the silence that began in the city after sunset was the result of a widespread terror rather than an official order. This situation created great anxiety not only in the lower classes, but also in the middle and upper strata of society, because the system was failing to protect everyone, regardless of income or status. Rumors suggested that the victims of the unsolved cases were not chosen randomly, but rather targeted because they knew a secret. This gave rise to the feeling that the lost journal was not just a ledger, but a mirror of the public's conscience and dark secrets, pushing paranoia to the highest level. This hysteria reached such a point that even a simple misunderstanding could turn into a bloody incident. For example, in the winter of 1761, a known literate cloth merchant in the Whitechapel area was stopped by his neighbors while returning home in the dark with a thick, leather-bound notebook under his arm. Although this notebook was the merchant's commercial ledger for daily accounts, the crowd immediately accused him of being the carrier of the lost journal. The crowd attacked the merchant in an attempt to seize the secret inside the notebook. The attempted lynching could only be stopped when a justice of peace arrived at the scene at the last minute and certified the merchant's commercial reputation. In other words, not the content of the journal, but the mere existence of the journal was enough to trigger hysteria.
Another point is that this social hysteria was directed straight at the legal and judicial mechanisms of that period. The public was blaming judges who misused their authority and incompetent watchmen instead of punishing the criminals. The press used fragmented and sensational information coming from the crime scenes to publish headlines about the decay of a fair justice system. Newspapers were frequently filled with letters written by anonymous London residents demanding the resignation of the justices of the peace. This situation carried the search for justice into the streets. People's courts were established. In other words, the public started lynching people they deemed suspicious or punishing them using their own means. Especially in poor neighborhoods, innocent people who were thought to be foreigners or immigrants were targeted with suspicion. This showed that a dangerous period had been entered where the anger of the crowds, not the rule of law, held sway. From a legal perspective, these unsolved cases created a turning point. London's administration was under great pressure to appease the public's rising anger and prove that the system had not collapsed. Research results showed that property insurance premiums in central London increased by up to 30% during this period. This was the financial equivalent of the crime risk and caused disruption to merchants' trade. This economic pressure compelled Parliament to take action. However, the government's response was far from solving the root cause of the problem. Instead of establishing a new, effective police force, they focused on stiffening existing penalties. New laws passed facilitated the death penalty, even for minor offenses. This was a simple maneuver intended to intimidate the public, not to improve real investigation tools. In other words, the state was only trying to appease the public but avoiding solving the source of the problem. This political unresponsiveness further undermined public confidence in the judiciary and turned the mystery of the lost journal into not just an unsolved crime case, but a permanent monument to legal failure. The combination of this social chaos and legal unsolvability elevated the incident from an ordinary crime case to the level of an urban legend. Analytically, this situation showed the moment a society loses its rational order. With official records blank, fear and speculation filled the void. Since the official investigation had ended, only analytical speculation and probabilities regarding the identity of the perpetrator remained.
The Lost Journal claims is a series of cases that the judicial system officially closed, but which the public never forgot. Therefore, to put the incident into a rational framework, we can develop three main hypotheses based on the fragmented data we have. These hypotheses will enable us to understand the motivation behind the actions rather than the identity of the perpetrator. For the disappearance of the Lost Journal points to a psychological act of usurpation rather than a physical theft. Firstly, the lone wolf psychopathological hypothesis. This theory suggests that the perpetrator sought personal satisfaction in their actions, and that the stolen journal was merely an object of memory hunting. According to this analysis, the victims were not chosen randomly, but were individuals who carried abstract values such as memory, order, or personal history, which the perpetrator lacked. This is the most disturbing scenario, requiring us to empathize. Imagine that the victim entrusted their entire life, their dreams, and their most secret fears to that small, leather-bound notebook. For instance, consider a quiet notary clerk, one of the victims. This clerk kept a journal detailing the routine of their life, their humble desires, and their debts to their family. By stealing this notebook, the perpetrator actually accessed neither a secret nor a treasure. They merely appropriated someone else's orderly life. The perpetrator's motivation may be to erase this person's existence, that is, to silence even their last words. We might imagine that the perpetrator lives a kind of substitute life in their secret lair, reading the victim's final moments from the notebook. The content of the notebook is not a map for the perpetrator, but a collector's piece of a soul. This explains the serial nature of the act and the independence of the victim's social status. In other words, the material value of the notebook or any concrete secret it contains is unimportant. What matters is the usurpation of the personal existence that the notebook represents. This reveals a pattern based entirely on psychological motivations, which investigators could never catch.
Another point is the political conspiracy state secret hypothesis. This hypothesis accepts the existence and theft of the lost journal, but argues that the motivation was institutional, not personal. London in the 1760s was a period characterized by admiralty contracts and high-value smuggling networks. If the stolen notebooks contained evidence that the victims recorded such high-level corruption, routes for smuggled tobacco or Indian silk, or political blackmail schemes, this would suggest that the act was organized by high-ranking individuals. As a concrete example, let's assume one of the victims was a low-ranking clerk in the Admiralty Logistics Department. The presence in this clerk's notebook of dates for ship outfitting contracts secured by bribery or details of secret opium shipments would turn the elimination of the notebook into a matter of state security. From this perspective, the person or people who committed the murders could be professional executioners assigned the task of destroying the notebooks. Our analysis explains the tendency of police records and justices of the peace to rapidly close the investigation with the existence of such a high-level protection mechanism. If the lost journal contained information that would disrupt the balance of power in London, the deliberate negligence of the judicial system and the rapid labeling of these cases as unsolved lead to a logical conclusion. This is not just a crime, but an act of memory erasure committed by the state. Finally, the systemic production mitosis hypothesis. This is the most skeptical hypothesis and suggests that the lost journal never existed as a concrete object. According to this theory, the lost journal is the result of the judicial system's own incompetence and chaotic record-keeping. As the investigation failed to find tangible evidence, the public, the media, and ultimately police records invented the lost journal as the sole and explanatory reason behind every tragedy that could not be solved. If we empathize, we understand why the public embraced this legend. Facing the truth, which is accepting that the justice system actually doesn't exist, is far more terrifying. For example, when the body of one of the victims was found, an inexperienced watchman examining the scene might have reported a simple debt ledger or address notes dropped by the victim as the lost journal, under the influence of panic and hysteria. In every subsequent unsolved case, the repetition of this initial error by the media and the public solidified the legend. This hypothesis shows that the mere dysfunction of the judicial system was enough to make society believe in the lost journal without the perpetrator having to be a psychopath or a conspirator. In other words, the lost journal is not a piece of criminal evidence, but a manifesto of social fear and distrust. These three hypotheses cover the entire spectrum of London's reaction to the lost journal claims. The greatest legacy of the incidents remaining unsolved is the impossibility of reaching a definitive conclusion. A permanent legend now exists, filling the void left by official history, a legend created by speculation, fear, and analysis. Up to this point, we have examined the impact of the unsolvability of the lost journal claims on 1760s London, but the most enduring legacy of this story is its timelessness. Firstly, when we look at the analysis of the legal legacy, the lost journal changed the law not by its existence, but by its absence. This intense and persistent pressure created by these unsolved cases on the public, though indirectly, sowed the first seeds for the idea of abandoning London's fragmented judicial system decades later and establishing a new and centralized police force, the Metropolitan Police. In other words, London embarked on the path to establishing a modern police force only after seeing how great a social cost the unsolvability created. The lost journal was proof that the judicial system could not even keep its own records. This situation had an indirect impact on the standardization of court records in later periods.
Another point is, we must ask ourselves this question: what would happen if we experienced a series of unsolvability crises in the style of the lost journal today, in the 21st century information age? In 1760, the problem was a lack of data and institutional organization. Today, the problem would be data overload and a crisis of trust. While every step we take is digitally recorded, today, a perpetrator not leaving evidence in multiple connected cases and eliminating the digital footprints or personal diaries of the victims every time would create unimaginable fear. As is known, modern investigation systems rely on cybersecurity experts, forensics, and centralized databases. Imagine these systems failing constantly. In other words, in 1760, you were afraid because the state couldn't protect you. Today, you would be afraid because the state couldn't protect you despite all the data it holds. This would mean the collapse of fundamental trust in technology.
In this modern crisis, social media would turn the whisper culture into a global hysteria in seconds. Fake analyses, deep fake evidence, and constantly changing expert opinions would completely erase the concept of what truth is. Instead of attributing the unsolvability to the state, the public would start believing that algorithms, big data, and digital records deliberately concealed the truth. This means the erosion of confidence in reality itself, not just the legal system. Let's look closer at this situation. Imagine an elderly professor disappearing from a building in the city we live in, protected by an intense camera network and equipped with smart systems, and police findings pointing to a single conclusion: a missing, encrypted notebook. Police examine every entrance, exit of the building, elevator movements, even the heat maps of in-apartment sensors. Artificial intelligence scans hundreds of terabytes of footage. Despite all this technology, not a single seamless moment regarding the professor's disappearance can be detected either at the scene or in the city. No door was forced, no alarm sounded, no IP address showed unusual activity. The only thing missing is the tablet containing the professor's personal digital diary, which they wrote in every night, fully encrypted and without cloud backup. The situation is the same in 3 consecutive similar incidents. No victim, no forced entry, only private digital memories missing. This situation would undoubtedly be chilling, because this would mean the operation of something that exceeds the power of an individual, the system itself, or an invisible force behind the system. The question that crosses the public's mind is all this surveillance power of the state being used not to protect us, but merely to steal information from us? This modern lost journal embodies a fear far beyond the helplessness of 1760, the fear that an invisible surveillance system can capture you at any moment, but cannot protect you. The lost journal has ceased to be an unsolved crime and has become a metaphor for human history. The inability to solve the case shows us how fragile the reliability of records are in every period. Official history is not just composed of what is written down. It is also composed of what the system risked losing or allowed to be lost out of fear. The Lost Journal is both the story of a concrete notebook lost in the misty streets of London and a historical reflection of our ongoing concern about who is protecting our digital memory in the modern age.